There are two kinds of children in every family business. The ones who show up for the photographs, and the ones who show up at 6 in the morning when the boiler breaks and the delivery truck is late and the accountant is on vacation and nobody else is coming. Families, as a rule, reward the first kind. Not until a Tuesday comes when a man slides a folder across a conference table and realizes, too late, that the second kind had been reading every document he ever signed. My name is Rena Voss. I had just turned 32. And at around 11 on a Tuesday morning in March, my brother Daniel walked into Voss Precision Manufacturing like he owned it. He did. On paper, my father had signed 51% of the company to Daniel 4 months earlier. Controlling interest. Majority shareholder. The whole thing done through a firm in Columbus that nobody in our family had heard of before, and nobody bothered to tell me about until a Thursday night in February, when my mother mentioned it the way you mention the weather. "Oh, your father finalized the business transfer last fall. Did we not say?" My blood didn't run cold. It ran very, very still. She had no idea what I was already holding. Before I take you into that conference room, please hit like and subscribe. It really helps me to keep me motivated also. Drop your city in the comments below. I read every single comment, and I'd love to know where you are right now. Now let me take you back to where this whole thing started. 8 months before the Tuesday, Daniel walked through that door like he had built the place with his own 2 hands. It was a Saturday in September. The kind where the light comes in sideways and makes everything look older than it is. I was in my father's office at the plant. Not snooping, working. I was the one who worked weekends. I had been the one who worked weekends for 11 years. My father's filing cabinet was open because I had been pulling. The Q3 supplier contracts and the bottom drawer had slid too far, and a manila accordion folder had tipped forward and landed on the floor with a sound like a small, patient exhale. I picked it up. The tab on the folder said Voss Succession, Draft. I stood there for a moment. The fluorescent light above the desk hummed. Outside, the parking lot was empty. My car was the only one in it, same as every Saturday. I opened the folder. There were 3 documents inside. 2 were drafts, marked as such, dated the previous spring. The third was different. It was not a draft. It had a notary seal. It had my father's signature in the bottom right corner, the one he only used for legal documents, the tall R, the looping V. It had a date. August 14th, it was a shareholder transfer agreement. 51% of Voss Precision Manufacturing transferred to Daniel Arthur Voss, effective upon the senior Voss's incapacitation or voluntary retirement. I read it twice. I turned it over. I checked the back. I looked for my name. My name was not in it. I put the folder back exactly as I had found it. Accordion ties looped the same way, position in the drawer matching the indent in the dust. I closed the cabinet. I finished pulling the supplier contracts. I locked the office. I drove home at the speed limit with the radio off. I did not call anyone. I did not cry. I sat in my kitchen until 11 at night, going through 11 years of mental inventory. Every 6 a.m. I had ever shown up. Every crisis I had ever absorbed. Every supplier relationship I had built by remembering the names of people's children and following up when I said I would. Every system in that building that ran the way it ran because I had designed it to run that way. And then I thought about the other thing. The thing I had seen once, 2 years earlier, in a different drawer in a different office. The thing I had filed away as a small administrative detail because at the time it had seemed like nothing more than that. I opened my laptop. I started making calls on Monday. But before I tell you what I found, let me tell you about my father. Raymond Voss built Voss Precision, manufacturing from a 900-square-foot machine shop in 1987. He was the kind of man who kept a logbook of every contract he had ever won and every one he had ever lost. And he reviewed it every January 1st without fail. He shook hands the way people used to shake hands, like the grip was the contract itself. He had 3 rules he said out loud, so often they had stopped meaning anything. Show up, follow through. Don't embarrass the name, I followed all 3. Longer and harder than anyone in that building. Daniel followed the 4th rule. The one my father never said out loud but enforced more strictly than any of the others. Be the sun. Daniel was 38. He had worked at the company for 6 years, nominally in business development, functionally at whatever altitude kept him visible enough to matter and uninvolved enough to avoid blame. He had my father's jaw and my father's handshake, and he golfed with the same 3 clients every summer and called it relationship management. He had never once stayed past 5:30. He had never once been the person the floor supervisor called when a CNC machine threw an error code at 2 in the morning. I had been that person since I was 23. My mother is a woman who believes that love means not saying the hard thing. She loved my father by agreeing with him. She loved Daniel by being proud of him. She loved me by worrying about me, which in her language meant asking why I worked so much and whether I had met anyone lately, and wasn't it a shame I had never taken a real vacation. She did not mean harm. She never meant harm. The harm was just the exhaust from the engine, not the fuel. I learned 3 things early. 1. My father rewarded confidence over competence. If you said the thing in the right voice in the right room with the right posture, it became true until it became fact. Daniel had understood this before I had. 2. My father punished anxiety. If I raised a concern too carefully, too thoroughly, with too much supporting data, he would smile the smile that meant I was being difficult. He would say, "Rena, you have always been a worrier." I stopped bringing concerns with data. I started bringing solutions with a single number. 3. Invisible work is still invisible even when the entire building runs because of it. The floor doesn't know who designed the floor. It just holds, I was the floor. My father called it reliability. I called it building a record. 11 years of it. Steady meant I was watching. Steady meant I was learning everything he never thought to teach Daniel. Because he assumed Daniel would never need to know it, and assumed I would always just be there. He was right about one of those things. Now let me tell you what I found in that other drawer. In the spring, 3 weeks after I found the succession folder, I drove to the county recorder's office in Dayton. Not Columbus, where the succession documents had been filed. Dayton. Because the thing I had seen 2 years earlier was a property record. A deed for the building itself. Voss Precision. Manufacturing operated out of a 40,000 square foot facility on Crane Road. My father had owned the building since 1994. He had mentioned once, at a dinner I was not supposed to be paying close attention at, that the building was the real asset. Machines depreciate. Real estate doesn't. Not in this county. The deed I had glanced at 2 years earlier had been a transfer document. I had assumed it was historical. I had not read the date closely enough. I read the date now. Standing at the county recorder's counter with a clerk named Deb, who smelled like coffee and had a green cardigan, with a small American flag pin on the lapel. The building had been transferred, not to Daniel, not to my father's revocable living trust, where his estate planner had been telling him to put it for 3 years, to Rena Marie Voss, to me, in 2021. Signed by my father, notarized, recorded, effective and binding. I said, "Can I get a certified copy of this?" Deb said, "That'll be $4.50. I paid with exact change." My hands were steady. My hands always surprised me when they were steady. I drove back to the plant and finished the rest of my Tuesday. Ate lunch at my desk. Answered 17 emails. Approved a purchase order for new coolant filtration equipment and CC'd the floor supervisor. Left at 5:45, which was early for me. I did not tell anyone what I had found. Not yet. Let me pause here for a second. If someone in your family has ever made a decision about something that was yours without telling you, drop the word copy in the comments. I want to know how many of us there are. I read every single comment tonight, I promise. Because what comes next isn't the ending. Not even close. I still had to sit across from my father and my brother and say the quiet part out loud. And they still thought they were going to walk away with everything. Back to the story. Here is what had actually happened. As best I have been able to reconstruct it, Claire Booker laid all of this out across a yellow legal pad in April. She said, "Rena, you own the building. The recorded deed is valid. The correction was never filed. Until it is, You are the legal owner of the property that houses Voss Precision Manufacturing. I said, what does that mean for the business transfer? She said, it means your brother owns 51% of a company that operates out of a building he has no legal right to occupy without the permission of the owner of that building. I said, and who is the owner of that building? She looked at me over her reading glasses. She said, you are. I sat with that for a moment. Outside her window, Brown Street was doing its ordinary Tuesday things. A bus, a woman with a stroller, a man eating a sandwich on the bench by the parking meter. Everything completely normal. Completely unaware. I said, what are my options? She said several. You could do nothing and let the corrective deed be filed, which is almost certainly what your father intends and what the estate planner will eventually push for. You could negotiate, use your ownership position as leverage for a formal recognition of your role before relinquishing the building. Or you could make a different kind of move entirely. She leaned back. She said, the thing about a recorded deed, Rena, is that it isn't an accident anymore. It's a fact. And facts have options. I said, let's build something. We met 3 more times before I was ready. Claire was methodical. She had a way of organizing complexity into a sequence that felt like a staircase rather than a wall. She did not use words like revenge or leverage, though those words lived in adjacent rooms of every conversation we had. She used words like position and recognition and structure. What we built was this: a formal operating agreement for a restructured Voss Precision, in which my 49% minority share would carry weighted voting rights on all operational decisions based on an 11-year record of documented contributions. A facilities lease agreement between me, as building owner, and the company at fair market rate, with a clause granting me right of first refusal on any future sale. Title to the building filed permanently in my name, not the trust, not Daniel, mine, unless I chose otherwise. And a letter, drafted by Claire, ready to be sent simultaneously to my father, Daniel, and the estate planner, on a date of my choosing. Claire said, once this is filed and the letter goes out, it cannot be unfiled. Your father will know you know. Daniel will know. Your family dynamic will change permanently. I said, it changed permanently in August when my father signed a document and didn't tell me. She nodded. She didn't argue. I signed the operating agreement draft in pencil first. Twice. Because Claire had told me to practice. Then we set the send date. A Tuesday in March, 9 a.m. I would be at work. I would be at my desk. I would be doing exactly what I did every single Tuesday. I drove back to the plant that evening. My father was in the parking lot heading to his car. He saw me, he waved. He said, late night again, Rena? I said, you know me, Dad. He said, I do. He got in his car and drove away. I stood in the parking lot for a moment. He thought he knew me. He thought he knew which version of me existed in relation to him. The floor, the steady one, the reliable one. He did not know I had been building something for months. I went back inside, and I finished my Tuesday. The weeks that followed were the longest performance I have ever given. My father made pot roast the Sunday before everything changed. His version, with the pearl onions and the red wine and the Dutch oven he had owned since 1989. He only made it when something important was coming. I had eaten this pot roast before the first big client contract, before Daniel's wedding, before my mother's surgery. It was his something is about to shift meal. He did not realize I knew this about him. Daniel was there with his wife Priya and their 2 kids. My father sat at the head of the table. My mother poured the wine. Daniel talked about a trade show he had been to in Atlanta. He used the phrase our company twice in 12 minutes. I counted. My father looked at Daniel and said, big spring coming. Daniel nodded. He said, exciting time. My mother touched my arm. She said, you look tired, Rena. I said, just busy, Mom. The pot roast smells incredible. It did smell incredible. Thyme and red wine and the low patient heat of something that had been waiting for a very long time. My father looked at me then. He said, Daniel's going to need your help getting up to speed, on the operational side. I hope you'll give him that. I said, of course, Dad. He nodded. He was satisfied. He picked up his fork. Help. 11 years of building the thing, and the word he chose was help. I reached for the bread. I passed the butter to my mother. I kept my face the face of the steady one. Inside my head, I was noting every word and filing it in the folder I had been keeping for 11 years. I ate the pot roast. I said it was perfect. It was. 2 days before the letter went out, Daniel came by my office. He knocked, which he rarely did. He sat down across from me, which he also rarely did. He said, "Hey, I know the transition has been a lot. I just want you to know I see how hard you work." I said, "Thanks, Daniel." He said, "I want this to work for both of us." He said it the way you say things when you believe them, and also when you need them to be true. There was something genuine in it. I had known Daniel for 34 years, and I knew the difference between his performance and his real face. This was, at least partially, his real face. He loved our parents. He believed he had earned what he was given because, in his experience, what you were given and what you earned had always felt like the same thing. That was not malice. That was simply the water he had always swum in. I said, "I want that too." He stood up. He shook my hand. He left. I looked at my screen. Claire's draft letter was in my inbox, flagged for Tuesday. I did not sleep well that Sunday. I lay in my bed in my apartment on Grafton Avenue, and I listened to the building settle. And I thought about my father at 23, opening the machine shop with a rented truck and 1 employee and a logbook. I thought about what he had built. I thought about the Saturday I was 11 years old, and he had taken me to the plant and shown me how every machine worked. The lathe and the mill and the grinder, and he had said, "Whoever knows how this works will always have a job." I had believed him. I had taken it as a promise. He had not meant it that way. He had just been filling a Saturday afternoon. At some point, I fell asleep. Tuesday arrived the way it always did. Gray light. The alarm at 5:40. Coffee from the break room machine because mine was still in the car. The floor supervisor, Pete Gallagher, 22 years at the company, nodding at me in the hallway. "Morning, Rena. Morning, Pete." I sat at my desk. I opened my email. At 9 a.m. exactly, Claire's letter sent. CC'd to my father's personal address, Daniel's address, and the estate planner's address. Subject line, Voss Precision, Building Ownership and Operational Structure. Formal notice of recorded deed, current legal status, proposed operating agreement, facilities lease terms, and a request for a meeting within 14 days to discuss the path forward. No threats. No accusations. Just facts and a proposal. At 9:17, my father called. I let it ring. At 9:19, Daniel called. I let it ring. At 9:24, my father called again. I picked up. I said, "Hi, Dad." He said, "Rena, what is this?" Not a question. "The other kind." I said, "It's a letter from my attorney." "Did you read it?" He said, "I read enough of it." He said, "The building." That was a clerical error. That was always supposed to be corrected. I said the correction was never filed, Dad. He said, "Because I forgot." "You know I forgot." I said, "I know." A silence. He said, "You can't do this." I said, "I haven't done anything yet. I've sent a letter proposing a meeting." He said, "You're threatening me." I said, "Dad, I'm asking to be recognized. In writing, formally, for what I've actually been doing here for 11 years. Another silence. Longer this time, he said, "I always knew you'd be taken care of." There it was. That sentence. Taken care of. The sentence that assumed I was something that needed managing rather than someone who had been doing the managing. I had been waiting for that sentence for 3 weeks without knowing I was waiting for it. I said, "Dad, I'd like to have this conversation in person, with Claire present and with whoever you'd like to bring. Can we do that?" He said, "I need to call Daniel." I said, "Of course." I hung up. Pete Gallagher knocked on my open office door 30 seconds later. He had a clipboard. He said, "The Franklin order needs a sign-off." "You got a minute?" I said, "Yeah, Pete, come in." I signed the order. I asked about his son's baseball tryouts. He said it went well. I said that was great. Then I went back to my Tuesday. The meeting was 9 days later in Claire's conference room. My father came with Gerald, the estate planner, who had the expression of someone who had recently had a very bad week, which he had. Daniel came alone. He sat across from me and did not shake my hand this time. Claire had printed 3 copies of everything. Bound, tabbed, organized. Gerald opened by saying the deed transfer had been an error, that there was clear intent to correct it, that courts generally side with intent over technical recording errors in cases like this. Claire said, with the patience of someone who had expected exactly that sentence, "Gerald, you are welcome to pursue that argument. The recorded deed is valid and has been valid for 3 years. My client's position is not adversarial. She is proposing a negotiated structure that compensates her for her documented operational contribution and formalizes her role going forward. If the alternative is litigation over the deed, that is available to her. But that is not what she is proposing today." She slid the operating agreement across the table. Gerald looked at it. My father looked at it. Daniel looked at it and then looked at me. My father said, "Rena, why didn't you just come to me?" I said, "Dad, when?" He didn't answer. I said, "In August when you signed the transfer. In February when Mom mentioned it at dinner like it was weather. In March when Daniel started using the phrase 'our company' at the dinner table. When exactly was the window?" My father looked at the table. I said, "I am not here to take anything from you. I am here because I built something and I would like it to have my name on it, the same way it has always had my work in it." Daniel said very quietly, "I didn't know he hadn't told you." He said it to the table first. Then he lifted his eyes and said it directly to me. "I thought you knew." "He told me he had talked to you." My father's jaw moved. He said nothing. I looked at Daniel. He was telling the truth. I could see it. I had known his face for 34 years. I said, "I know, Daniel." Claire let the room sit for a moment. Then she said, "Should we go through the agreement?" We went through the agreement. 3 hours later, my father signed, weighted voting rights on all operational decisions, documented and binding. Facilities lease in my name, fair market rate, right of first refusal. Official title, Chief Operating Officer, Voss Precision Manufacturing, with retroactive recognition of tenure from year 1. And the building still mine, with a right of purchase clause for the trust at appraised value if both parties agreed in writing. Gerald filed the paperwork that afternoon. Whether out of efficiency or because he wanted the whole thing to be finished, I don't know. Probably both. My father did not hug me when we left. He shook my hand. It was the longest handshake he had ever given me. He held it a moment longer than necessary, which was the closest he knew how to come to saying the thing he couldn't say out loud. I let him have that. Pause with me again. If you just unclenched your jaw, tap that like button. It helps more than you know. I thought the conference room was the ending. It wasn't. It was chapter 10 of 15. The part that came after is the part I didn't plan for. Stay with me. My father retired in October. He announced it at the plant on a Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock. The whole floor gathered, the way he had announced every major thing in the company's history. He talked about 36 years. He talked about the people who had built it with him. He listed Pete Gallagher and the floor supervisors by name. He listed the original 3 machinists who were still there. He listed Daniel. He listed me last. He said, "And Rena, who has known where every bolt in this building belongs since before I thought to ask." It was not an apology. It was Raymond Voss. It was as close as the language he had would let him get. I stood in the back of the floor with my arms crossed and my eyes dry, and I thought about the Saturday I was 11 years old, and he had showed me how the lathe worked and told me that whoever knows how this works will always have a job. He had meant it as a fact. It had become 11 years later a promise. And then eventually a deed. Gerald sent Claire a note 2 weeks after the retirement. The corrective deed, the one my father had signed and never filed, had been permanently voided at my father's own instruction. The building would remain in my name indefinitely. Claire forwarded the note to me with no message attached. "Just the document," I wrote back. "Thank you," she replied 3 minutes later. 3 words, 11 years documented. I saved that email. I still have it. I saved it because it said the thing out loud that I had spent 11 years making true without anyone ever saying it. Not a victory, just a record, a fact. The kind that doesn't need to be loud because it's already filed, already signed, already real. Daniel and I found a working rhythm over the following months. It was not warm at first. It was professional, which was actually better than what we'd had before, because what we'd had before was family warm laid over a foundation of unexamined imbalance. He was good with clients in a way I was not. I was good with operations in a way he was not. We were, it turned out, actually complementary, which might have been my father's original vision if he had ever thought to say it out loud to both of us in the same room at the same time. He hadn't, so we built it ourselves. The first real thaw came at the company holiday party in December. One of the newer machinists gave a toast and mentioned the COO by name. Daniel started clapping before anyone else in the room did. I looked at him across the space and he gave me a nod that had nothing performative in it at all. Just a nod. Just one person acknowledging another. I nodded back. My mother called me every Sunday through that winter. We talked about my father's retirement routine, about Daniel's kids, about what I was reading. One Sunday in February, she said I should have told you about the transfer when he signed it. I should have been the one to say something. I said, "Mom?" She said, "I knew and I didn't want the conflict." I said, "I know." She said, "Are you all right?" I said, "I am better than all right." She said, "You were always the one who held things together." I said, "I know that now." March came back around. 1 year from the Tuesday, Daniel had walked into that building like he owned it. He walked in that same morning, same as every morning. He passed my office. He knocked on the open door. He said, "Morning." I said, "Morning." He said, "Franklin orders looking clean." I said, "Pete ran it well." He nodded. He walked on. I turned back to my screen. The building around me ran the way it ran. The machines did what machines do when someone has spent 11 years learning their language. Outside, March was doing its uncertain thing with the light. Half winter, half something else, trying to decide what it wanted to be. I opened the facilities management portal and approved the quarterly maintenance schedule. I forwarded it to Pete. I CC'd Daniel. I filed the confirmation in the folder I had kept for 11 years. The one with every decision and every approval and every 6 a.m. in it. The folder had my name on it. It always had. If you made it this far, thank you. I know some of you heard yourselves in it. Drop one word in the comments, just one. What would you have done standing at that county recorder's counter holding a 450 certified copy of your own name? Filed it, waited, walked away. I read every single comment. I answer the ones I can. If you want to hear the next one, about the brother who moved into my apartment while I was on a work contract overseas, and what I found in my own closet when I came home, it is linked in the description right below this video. You are not difficult. You are paying attention. See you there.